Today, we're going to unpack a really dangerous misunderstanding between men and women that, frankly, has some serious consequences. It's all about a story told through clothing, a story that, it turns out, has two very, very different interpretations.
You've heard it a million times, right? She was asking for it. It's this ugly, common excuse you hear after a sexual assault. But that whole idea, it's built on one single assumption about what a woman's clothes mean. An assumption we're going to put to the test today.
And you know that phrase isn't just some random throwaway comment. It's actually a symptom of a much, much bigger set of beliefs. To really get to the bottom of the problem, we first have to define what we're dealing with.
So at the core of all this, you have what researchers call rape myths. And what are those? Well, they're basically these widespread, totally false ideas that just twist the reality of sexual violence. And their main job? To shift the blame, to take it off the person who did the harm and put it right onto the victim.
And get this, we're not talking about some fringe belief held by a few people. Research shows that more than half of us, over 50% of the public, believes in these myths to some degree. That's a huge number. And it tells you this isn't about a few bad apples. It's a deep-seated cultural thing. Oh, and by the way, men tend to buy into them at a way higher rate than women do.
Which brings us to the big question, the absolute heart of our investigation today. The myth about provocative clothing. That's probably the most common one of all. But is it actually true? I mean, really, do women who wear revealing clothes actually want to send a signal that they're available for sex? Well, a really fascinating study decided to find out.
So the researchers did something really smart. They looked at this story from two totally different perspectives. First, they asked women, hey, why do you wear this stuff? And then they turned around and asked men, what do you think her reasons are? And believe me, the gap between those two answers, it's just staggering. All right, so let's look at what the women said. The results? They could not be more clear. Overwhelmingly, their reasons were all about self-expression. You've got 82% saying, I just like how it looks. 72% saying, it makes me feel attractive. Now, compare that to the reasons men assume are in play. Just 5% of women said their goal was to seduce someone. Only 3% said it was to arouse men. It's not even close. The story women are telling with their clothes is about them, their confidence, their style.
And this is where that massive disconnect just smacks you in the face. On one side, you have her reality. It's about personal style, feeling good about herself. On the other side, you have his perception, which is, well, it's almost entirely about sex. You see that 82% of women saying, I like the look? Well, a nearly identical 84% of men see that and think, she wants to arouse me. They are looking at the exact same thing and reading two completely different stories.
Okay, so why? Why is this happening? What is behind this giant misunderstanding? The study didn't just stop at finding the gap. It went deeper to figure out what's causing it.
Okay, a huge piece of the puzzle comes down to men's own, physical and emotional reaction. When you ask them, almost 88% of men say they feel sexually aroused most or all of the time when they see a woman in revealing clothes. That's a really powerful, really common internal response.
And this, right here, is the absolute key. The study found a direct link. The men who reported feeling aroused were way more likely to project that feeling onto the woman. They assumed their arousal was her goal. So, in their head, the logic goes something like this. Because I feel aroused, she must have wanted me to feel this way. It's a classic case of mistaking your own reaction for someone else's intention.
Right. And this kind of thinking doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. The researchers point out that we are all swimming in a culture that constantly, relentlessly, frames women as sexual objects. Think about it. The media, fashion, ads, they all tell this story where a woman's body exists primarily for men to look at. So that cultural programming makes that leap from, I feel aroused, to, she must have done this for me, feel, well, almost logical.
Okay, so we've established that men often misread the signals. But there's one last and maybe the most important question left to answer. Does this misperception and the clothes that supposedly trigger it actually lead to a higher risk of being assaulted?
Yeah, this is it. This is the question that cuts right to the heart of that whole she was asking for it myth. Because if that myth had any truth to it, you would expect to see a clear connection in the data, right? A link between how a woman dresses and her chances of experiencing sexual violence.
So, that's exactly what the researchers did. They took the data on how women said they dressed and cross-referenced it with their histories of sexual victimization. Everything from unwanted comments all the way up to rape. They were looking for any pattern, any connection at all. And what did they find?
Nothing. Zero. A big, fat zero. There is absolutely no statistical correlation between how often a woman wears revealing clothing and her likelihood of being sexually assaulted. None. In fact, victims and non-victims reported wearing revealing clothes at basically the exact same rate. This is the fact that just completely demolishes the myth.
So, where does all of this leave us? What's the final verdict here? Now that we've looked at all the evidence, what's the real story we should be telling? Okay, let's just boil it down to 3 key truths. Number 1. The myth is flat out false. The data proves it. Clothing choice does not cause sexual violence. Period. Number 2. The perception gap is real and it is massive. Men are systematically misinterpreting women's intentions. And number 3. Understanding this gap isn't just some interesting fact. It is the absolute first step we have to take to start dismantling victim blaming for good.
Because, think about it. As long as this fundamental misunderstanding is out there, it gives people the perfect excuse to blame victims. It lets them create this totally false story where the victim is somehow responsible, which conveniently lets the actual perpetrator and society as a whole off the hook. And that's where we are. The evidence is clear. The myth is a lie. The misunderstanding is real. This isn't a story about a woman's seduction. It's a story about a man's misperception. So the real question for all of us is, now that we know the story we've been told is wrong, how do we start telling the right one?